Good morning, Boker Tov, on this fine Sunday morning. And thank you for being here, for listening, for giving me the opportunity of this special mitzvah of sharing words of Torah, as we always begin with some Torah learning. Let's do so. We start with giving some tzedakah, some charity. And we also make a bracha, a blessing, on the delicious coffee over here that God has given us, this wonderful part of nature and human discovery. So make a bracha, answer amen. If you have your own coffee, say a bracha with me. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehakol nihya bidvaro. Okay, so in 2001, some of you might actually remember, there's a verse in Psalms. We say this every single day. There's a verse in Psalms from King David that says, Kol haneshama tahalel yud kei. Every soul praises the Lord, praises God. The Talmud takes the word neshama, every neshama, every soul, because in describing a human being, it could have said Kol Adam, every person, which is maybe more common. Kol Ish, different descriptions of a human being, of a person. But here, the Torah or the Psalms says Kol HaNeshama, every soul. So the Talmud gives us a little bit of a deeper and important insight and says Kol HaNeshama. Neshama is related to the word neshima, which means to breathe. And the Talmud says, Akol neshima v'neshima, every breath that one can take, every breath that one is gifted, you should thank the Lord above, because you do not know, you do not take for granted that the next breath will be given to you. So Akol neshima v'neshima, it's a blessing, it's a gift, the most important gift that we have, that we could take another breath and another breath. So for every breath that we are gifted and we are given, thank the Lord above, thank God Almighty. And this this concept, or this appreciation, is something that we've seen in countless stories. But I remember a particular story. It was in 2001. A terrible tragedy occurred in Israel. It was a wedding. And they were on the dance floor, and tragically, without any warning, the entire floor gave way, and many people were killed and injured. It was just a horrible tragedy at the height of celebration, of a simcha, of a wedding, the most joyous occasion of an individual and their family and friends and so on. And I remember when this happened, and I remember thinking about this verse, Hakol neshima v'neshima, every single breath you have to thank the one above, the Almighty. And they then subsequently did a investigation of how this could happen, and it turned out that the builders were not negligent in this particular case, but they followed a system, sort of a protocol of engineering called the Kalpal, I think is what it was. I think Palkal, that was followed at that time in many of the buildings in Israel. And there was a flaw. There was a flaw that caused this accident. And that after that investigation, they prohibited this engineering methodology in structures. So the point being over here is that in life, you have to assess and look at what works and what doesn't work. And when you come to realize that something doesn't work, you have to have the wisdom to say, okay, it doesn't work. It doesn't work, and therefore we have to change course. And if something does work and has worked, especially for thousands of years, don't tamper with it. Don't mess with it. So we talk about a wedding over here in this particular case, this tragedy. marriages and family and a healthy family and a healthy father and mother and 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 the value system that we've had in that family has worked for thousands of years. And unfortunately, in the last maybe 50 years, we've started to tamper with that. And the results are devastating. The results are devastating. So let's realize that and put that to an end. But let's focus here on the positive, okay? We could talk about that maybe perhaps a little bit more at another time, but today I want to focus a little bit more on the positive, although sometimes you have to highlight the negative to appreciate and to resolve the positive, to resolve to adopt the positive. It's like, in New York, there was this big talk about the, thank God, just a mild earthquake that happened this Friday in New York, in New Jersey, Pennsylvania, in that region. And the Rebbe once spoke that an earthquake, although it's somewhat of a natural phenomena, is meant as a message from above to shake us up a little bit, to shake us up, to rethink, to reevaluate. That's part of the message that is coming from above. So we have the earthquake, we have a eclipse that's coming up. All these have messages. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about that. And I want to say this within the context of this past week finished the shiva for my brother, Reb Zalman ben Rafal, and I would be lying. I wouldn't be honest if I wouldn't admit that I'm sad. Of course, I'm sad. It's normal to be sad, and to just share something personal of both a compliment and a reason for the sadness. Although when losing a member of your family, there's no reason needed to be given, but to share something a bit personal, which I might have shared in the past, when as written in the title, Zalman was my stepbrother, but nevertheless, since my young childhood, my dad passed away at a very young age. His mom passed away at a very young age. And then my stepfather, my mother got married. And my stepfather came with 3 of his own boys. My mom came with 3 children. Then they were, thank God, blessed with another child. So we have one half sister. That's the biological link between the families. And we all grew up together as a beautiful family. And I will add, and this is to honor my brother. I was my personal journey over here or experience. I came from a religious family. My biological father, was an Auschwitz survivor, as many of you listening to this class know. But we grew up in Borough Park, and the Chabad community was in Crown Heights, for those who know Brooklyn. But this is, remember, before internet, before YouTube, before WhatsApp, before any other messaging. And if you grew up in one neighborhood, as a child especially, where you didn't really watch the news or read the news, growing up in one community, even within the Jewish religious community, a different community was totally alien. It was like a strange world. So being a young child of 6 years old and coming from Borough Park and having the friends there and the support of a young orphan at that time, as I was, and then moving to Crown Heights was scary. It was nerve-wracking. It was a challenge. It was a challenge for a young kid. And my stepbrothers, definitely adopted both myself and my sisters and myself as their own. And that was, and I at the time, I maybe didn't even appreciate it as much, but now looking back, it was a wonderful and necessary and sort of critical support to have them. And they were, and my brother Zalman being the oldest, and he was the dean in the yeshiva, there was a pride. There was a pride to be able to refer to myself as these are my brothers. You know, they were a prestigious and very well respected family in the world of Chabad. So it was a wonderful, loving support and care that was given to myself, and there's a deep appreciation and connection and bond that developed as a result of that. So, just sharing that little personal experience, and maybe also a lesson that whether it's a brother or a friend that's out there, you never know the impact. Reaching out to someone who is in a challenging or vulnerable emotional place, how impactful and necessary and supportive that will last a lifetime to a young sapling, a young seed who is going through a challenge in life, a difficult challenge in life. So that's that. Moving on. So we're talking about tomorrow night is supposed to be the eclipse. It's pretty amazing. These things are natural events, but the Rambam and Torah tells us that you always should learn a lesson in our Avodat Hashem, in our service of God. What does an eclipse represent? What is its message? So the Talmud tells us that Yisrael doimen lalvona, that the Jewish people are compared to the moon, and the nations of the world are compared to the sun. Now, when the Talmud uses the term the nations of the world, often the context of that is not individual people, but more the nations of the world in somewhat of an adversarial relationship to the Jewish people. Meaning, look at us today, after the October 7th horrific attacks. While there are many genuine, true friends that we have amongst the nations of the world, amongst the people of the world, by and large, the nations of the world, as represented by their governments, for the most part, including, sadly, the United States, have been either openly opposed, hateful, or at the very best, supporting in a very weak way, holding Israel to a standard that these nations don't hold themselves to, criticizing Israel, the most humane army. No other nation, while they're conquering or attacking a city, trying to root out their enemies and so on, will facilitate humanitarian aid and put their own soldiers in harm's way. And yet Israel is held to a higher standard, and Western media will openly lie and question and attack. Even our friends in the American government have been a disappointment, where on the one hand we have a deep appreciation for the arms provided, etc. On the other hand, openly and publicly accused and criticized Israel, which has some serious consequences in encouraging Hamas and beyond, those who are our enemies, and weakening and endangering our brothers and sisters in Israel and throughout the world. So in that context, often when the Talmud says the nations of the world, it's referring to those who are adversarial, not to the ones who are supportive and loving and go beyond and put their reputation and endanger themselves to show support of Israel. And my son, one of my boys, is studying in Israel, and he's at the Shuk in Yerushalayim, and who shows up in opened and much appreciated support of what's going on in Israel is a boxer who I must confess, I don't, I grew up in the days of Mike Tyson. I'm totally not up to date on what's going on in the boxing world today, but I think his name is Mayweather. Am I pronouncing his name correctly? And he's in the shuk and he shows up openly, proudly supporting Israel. And he's in the shuk and they're jumping for joy and appreciation, and he's excited, and those are wonderful, and we owe a tremendous debt of gratitude. So getting back over here, the nations of the world, the Talmud says, are compared to the sun. The Jewish people are compared to the moon. A likui hachama, the eclipse is a way of God reminding us from time to time that even though the sun is much larger, more powerful than the moon, the little moon can eclipse and block the sun, so to speak. It's a message that even when we feel that we are so small and there's doom and gloom, as many are expressing or losing hope, remember that the moon is capable of blocking the sun, and that we who compared to the moon are the ones that survive and are out there shining bright, etc. Now, I want to give a little bit of more details to this thought and this relationship from sun and moon, because we also find the other way around. We also find a verse that says Kishemesh umogen Hashem, Kishemesh umogen Hashem Elokim, that God is compared to the sun, and we, the people, are compared to the moon. Just as the moon receives its light from the sun, so too we receive our light, and the more we are a vessel for that, to be through humility, to receive God's light as the moon from the sun, the stronger that we are. What does that mean? So, and that is very much related to when this comes out this year. Amazingly, it comes out on Rosh Chodesh Nisan. The Medrash tells us when God created the world, the month of Tishrei, which is the month of when Rosh Hashanah was considered the new year. But once he took us out of Egypt and performed miracles, which happened in the month of Nisan as we're about to celebrate Passover, God dedicated Chodesh Hazel Lachem. He dedicated the month of Nisan on the new year, to be the new year, which means that we follow primarily the lunar calendar, representing the fact that it is what the moon represents, its strength. Its strength is in the fact that it's a recipient of God's light, that is who we are, and that is why we are still here today. So the more it appears that naturally, we do not have what it takes to overcome the challenges that come our way, the more we connect and we become a recipient to a force that's greater than us, which is what Nisan, the month of Nisan, represents. There was no natural way that the Jewish people could come out of Egypt. Yet God performed these miracles. The more we recognize that, the more they acknowledge that, well, the more we are moon-like, that we realize that we are a recipient that's connected to the Shemesh Umogen Hashem, the light, the energy that comes from God. The more we are connected to that, the more we will endure and be successful. Another perspective. Every single thing in Torah has many perspectives. Another perspective. It says the Shemesh represents more nature, more consistency, more that which is natural. The moon, the sun, that is. The moon represents that which is above nature. That which is above nature. The reason being that we, again, are compared to the Levana, and as such, we are connected to a higher force. So this is, I want to go back a little bit to as this class is in honor of my brother, I want to go back to a discussion, and a story. Talking about the moon and its connection to the sun in the positive sense, that when we connect to the energy of Hashem, we will be victorious, we will endure, we will overcome. And on the other hand, on the flip side, the sun represents a certain power of nature, while the moon represents a power which is above nature. Or to put it this way, the sun represents the laws of nature, and the moon, because it's waxing and wanes, represents a power which reminds us that from time to time that there's a greater power. It sort of breaks the consistency of nature. It breaks it in a positive sense, reminding us that there is a power that is not limited to nature. And even when things look so down, there's a rebirth. So I heard this story from my nephew. Again, as part of the hearing stories of my brother's passing, and this represents who he was at his core. That's the beauty of this story. Represents who he was. And it's a little bit of a private story, but it's been told to many and shared. So I hope that my nephews and nieces are okay with me sharing this, but because it has a positive message and it's been shared with many. So, up to almost the last 72 hours, or even 48 hours of my brother's passing, while he was seriously, critically ill, there was still some medical hope that some procedure can be done, and hopefully he'll overcome and recover. So at one point, one of the doctors came into the room. My brother at that point was not totally with it. He was a bit out of it. And the doctor was telling some of the family members not a great update, and some of the preparations in case the procedure fails and so on, some of the preparations that should be done. And at one point, either the doctor or one of the family members turned to my brother and asked whether he understood or he followed the conversation. And my brother shook his head and he said in Yiddish, a very famous statement that goes back to the Tzemach Tzedek, to the third Chabad Rebbe, as it related to a certain story. And my brother said yes, or he responded, and it was hard for him to speak. He had the energy, his level was extremely low, and he said, Tracht gut wird sein gut, which is a song that was also, the Eighth Day band made this into a song, and it's a famous statement from the Tzemach Tzedek, which the third Chabad Rebbe, which the Rebbe, our Rebbe of our generation, repeated many times and wrote this in letters to people. Which means, for those who understand Yiddish, you could give us a thumbs up. For those who don't understand Yiddish, I will translate. Tracht gut wird sein gut. Think positive and it will be positive. This was my brother's response to what the doctors were saying. In other words, he heard very well. And this was his response. This was truly his response. This is who he was. And I could say that being educated by the same dad, this was my dad's, my stepfather's, who raised me since basically almost as long as I can remember. This was his attitude in life. He went through a lot of serious struggles, but he had this Tracht gut wird sein gut. And what does that mean? Tracht gut, translation means think positive and it will be positive. But what does that mean? What does that mean? Is that a facade? Is that real? What does it mean, think positive and be positive? On the surface level, it's just good advice. You might as well be positive. Think negative. I mean, what for? Think positive. Think positive and it will be positive almost seems like a promise. Think positive and it will be positive. On what basis? Says who? Okay, so on one level, you could answer medically, mentally. When people have positive attitude, the results are usually better. Comes to the Rebbe and explains, based on the known author, the Shara B'tochen, the Rabbeinu Bachman, says, think positive and it will be positive is a one-liner that sums up the whole the whole foundation of what we call bitachon, trust in Hashem. Think positive is not just a statement; it's an avoda. It's a service. It's a way to. It's something that you got to work on to reach a place that, regardless of how difficult and bleak the situation appears, you have full resolve and trust in Hashem that things will be right. And the merit or the response, measure for measure from God, is that just like you are ignoring or overcoming all the negatives that you see around you and all the natural even results that might be calculated of what should be the end result of your situation, by the very fact that you dismiss all that and you raise truly yourself above that, God responds in kind. He annuls any decree or any result or any conclusion to the way things are headed, and sends you bracha and blessing. And that's what Tracht Gut wird sein Gut is. So that's a way of living life. It's a way of how people lived life. It's a way of how my father lived life. It's a way. I don't know what's going on. A little interruption. My apologies. It's a way the Rebbe lived life, and the effects were very clear. The positive effects. Of course, not always does the result as we see it happen, but that's another discussion, an important discussion, but for another time. I want to shift that a little bit in a different direction, and this has to do with the sun and moon dynamic. In describing my brother and a lesson to be learned, I am sharing this as a way, because the best way to honor his neshama, his soul, is by learning from him and being inspired by him. And in such, his soul and who he was continues to live with us in an even more positive way and in even a more impactful way. When the soul was down here below, there's things that we could learn, and because we take note, as King Solomon says, the surviving living should take to heart. This is a way that we could honor, and that's why I'm sharing some of these thoughts. My brother, late brother, Zalman ben Rafal, who I loved very deeply, this is who he was. We talk about the sun versus the moon. The sun representing nature, the moon representing Torah. The sun also represents, but we're talking about it from a given perspective. I want to make that clear. In this dynamic that we're discussing today, the sun represents nature, and the moon represents above nature, or messages that disrupt, which is a message from above nature. This takes us into a discussion of the our roots, our Jewish roots, our Torah values versus modernity, versus sort of Western culture, civilization. My brother grew up pretty much post-war with many Russian Jews that survived Stalinist Russia in a very uplifting, close Hasidic environment. Because after the war, there were many refugees that lived in like apartment buildings, like there was like one room or two rooms to a family. They shared a kitchen. They shared bathrooms in the sense that there was one bathroom for 20 families in a hallway or something like that. It was a very, very difficult time materially, but very rich spiritually, because there was many Jews that came through victorious over Stalinist Russia, World War II, full of rich spirit and dedication, and that's where he grew up. And he became the dean of a yeshiva here in the United States. He became the Rosh Yeshiva, the head of the yeshiva, and he taught and he dealt with yeshiva boys who were growing up in, relatively speaking, sort of spoiled United States. And there was a clash. There was a clash of, even within the Chabad Orthodox sort of Hasidic world. I don't like all these labels and titles, but that's the way it was. There was a clash of modernity, of exposure to the world with the old world. And he stubbornly and genuinely could not, or I would say definitely struggled. I wasn't his student in that sense, although he was older than me, but he wasn't my Rosh Yeshiva. But just the sense that I'm getting, and from talking to him from time to time, he really maintained and his connection to that world of truth, that world of beauty, that world of Hasidic value, that rich world, and rejected much of the modernity, the lowering of standards and values that was creeping in to our world. And this raises sort of the question, especially as an educator, how do you do that? How do you communicate that world of value, true value, godly value, to a youth that's coming up and that wants to have the good life, has other influences. And this is part of what the sun-moon dynamic teaches us. And in Judaism, the moon is more dominant, which means that, I'm sort of thinking out loud over here. We recognize nature. The sun is very much part of our lives. We recognize nature. We recognize certain developments, but we also understand that that's not the dominant force. That's not who we are. Of course, you have to have the wisdom, the chachma, and many educators, including my brother, who have influenced and impacted thousands, understood that, and they acknowledged that reality, and they lovingly embraced many of these students who were struggling with that. But yet, they always understood that Yisrael doimin la levana, that we are compared to the moon. That's who we are. That's the objective. That's the goal, not the other way around. There are those, talk about Western Jewry or American Jewry. Unfortunately, often there are people who approach that it is really, what's really important is the sun, again, within this context, meaning the culture of who we are, the culture of where we are, not who we are, but the culture of the surrounding life, and we allow Torah and its values to sort of impact it. Fine, let's have a little latkes. Let's celebrate a little bit the cultural aspect of Judaism. I mean, there are many degrees to this sort of dynamic and phenomena, but it's the other way around. It's the other way around. And I started off the class with you have to know what works and doesn't work. When you try to adopt Torah to modernity, to the Western civilization and culture, with all the positives that it does have, and unfortunately very much in decline, that's the sign. Meaning, when you go away from the truth, God's truth, which is represented in Torah and Jewish mysticism, Hasidic values, and you you start to amend that, and you start to dismiss that, and you just allow it to a little trickle so that you feel good about yourself. We see the results of that. The results of that is it doesn't survive, it doesn't endure, it doesn't work. The rate of assimilation, the rate of losing children is alarming. And not only is it losing children to our faith, to being Jews, it's losing children to even traditional values of the world at large. The eclipse and Rosh Chodesh Nisan reminds us what the real truth is, and what the real values are, and how we have to remember who has to be the dominant force, and who has to fit into what. We always follow the moon. Yes, we also recognize the sun, which is why we have a leap year, but the dominant force over here is our following the Levana, which is why our Hebrew birthday is what's important. It's Chodesh Nisan, which is a month of miracles. By understanding that approach and that core approach, we will merit to raise generations of proud Jews, people who are proud with who they are, connected to who they are, a value system that has worked. It has worked through all different types of challenges. Fulfilling the purpose of why we are here, not to be distracted, not to lose focus of why God sends us down into this world. So that's the discussion for today. I hope it is clear. I hope the message is clear. Thank you for the opportunity. I hope I've honored my brother over here. I hope we could learn from him and be better people. May his soul, his neshama, have an aliyah, bring forth blessings from upon high to all of us. We're getting ready for Passover. It's a month of miracles. It's a month of miracles for us today. And today, unfortunately, in our generation, we find ourselves in a time more than ever that we need miracles. So may we merit the miracles till the ultimate miracle of the coming of Mashiach speedily in our time. One of the promises that appears so often in a promise for the goodness of the entire universe. May it be so. B'meher b'yameinu. If you need anything for Pesach, you need matzah for Pesach, you need a place for the Seder, please reach out. If you know a family that's struggling and can't put food on the table for Pesach, please reach out. We will provide assistance. So thank you very much for listening. Have a wonderful, fantastic, blessed new week.